For months, she paid me cash to secretly teach her Mandarin. She never guessed I worked for her husband and that I'd be the one to expose everything. My name is Tessa Hartley, and I was fired over a dinner seat. Not for showing up late. Not for missing a deadline. Not for making a mistake that cost the company money. No, I lost my job because I didn't stand up fast enough when the CEO's wife walked past my table at a charity gala. That's it. That's the whole offense. You ever have one of those moments where your entire life turns upside down because someone decided to be offended by something you didn't even know you did? Well, this was mine. It was a Friday morning in March. 7:02 a.m. I'd just gotten to the office, coffee in hand, sorting through files for our West Coast accounts. The sun hadn't even fully risen yet, and I was the only one on our floor when the door to my office slammed open like a courtroom drama. There she was, Margot Ellingsworth, impeccably dressed, diamond necklace glinting, heels that screamed money, her face twisted in fury like I'd just insulted her ancestors. "You're done here," she hissed. "I'm speaking with my husband today, and your badge will stop working by noon." My coffee nearly slipped from my hand. "Excuse me?" Margot's eyes narrowed. "Last night, at the Children's Heart Foundation gala, I passed by your table. You didn't stand. You stayed seated like I wasn't even there." I blinked, stunned. "Wait, what? I didn't even see you." "Don't lie to me," she snapped. "You disrespected me in front of half the city's elite, and I will not have someone like you representing my husband's company." "I wish I could tell you," I laughed. "I wish I said something clever, something bold, something that might have changed the course of the next few hours. But I didn't, because all I could think was, is this really happening? Let me give you some context. I had spent 3 years building the International Business Development Division at Westmere Holdings from the ground up. When I joined, it was 2 clients. Just 2. Now 49. I'd worked late nights, weekends, holidays. I'd closed deals in 6 different languages, and I had the top performance review score in the entire department. But all of that didn't matter to Margot Ellingsworth, because she felt disrespected. And the thing is, I probably would have stood if I'd seen her. But between the dimmed lights, the back-to-back conversation at our table, and the fact that she was in a different aisle entirely, I genuinely didn't notice her until it was too late. Apparently, that wasn't good enough. By 8:15 a.m., I was sitting across from Jason Ellingsworth, the CEO, and her husband. He looked tired, older than the last time we spoke. "I'm sorry, Tessa," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "You know I value your work. But this situation, it's delicate. Margot's not letting it go. And frankly, I can't afford a war at home over a staffing decision." I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the files on his desk and say, "Grow a spine." But I didn't. I kept my voice steady. "You're firing me over an imaginary slight at a social event." His lips pressed into a thin line. "I'll make sure you get a severance package. And letters of recommendation." "Oh, great. Letters. Because that'll make up for being humiliated over brunch etiquette." I left his office in a fog. Everything I'd built evaporated. All because someone thought I didn't bow low enough at the altar of their ego. But what Margot didn't know, what Jason didn't know, was that I'd been keeping a secret. And that secret would blow their little empire apart. Because for the last 7 months I'd been working a side job, and Margot Ellingsworth was my client. Only she didn't know it. Not yet, but she would. Very, very soon. 7 months earlier, I was juggling 2 lives. By day, I was the international strategy manager at Westmere Holdings, corporate meetings, client pitches, endless spreadsheets. By night and often early mornings, I was tutoring Mandarin Chinese. Why? Because student loan debt doesn't magically vanish after college, even with a fancy title. And while my day job paid decently, it wasn't enough to cover both rent in Chicago and my astronomical interest payments. So one quiet Saturday, I logged onto a high-end freelance platform that catered to ultra-wealthy clients looking for discreet tutors. Most of the listings were for kids of oil executives or politicians' nieces, but one listing caught my eye. Seeking intensive Mandarin instruction, 2 sessions per week. In person, high discretion, must maintain absolute confidentiality, generous compensation. The address was on Lakeshore Drive in a building that screamed private elevators and doormen who make more than school teachers. The pay, $350 per session. Cash. There was no name listed, just a request for professional attire and to use a private side entrance. I'd worked with rich clients before. They usually didn't want their peers to know they were taking lessons. Appearance was everything. So I got creative. I applied under my maiden name Tessa Whitman, keeping it separate from anything tied to Westmere. I pulled my hair into a low bun, wore large framed glasses I didn't need, and swapped my office wardrobe for neutral conservative cardigans. I didn't want recognition. I just wanted the money. When the elevator opened to the penthouse suite that first day, I thought I'd walked into an Architectural Digest spread. Marble floors, glass walls, a view of the entire city glittering like spilled jewels. Then came the voice. "You're late," she said, though I was 5 minutes early. Standing there in a white silk robe, a gold watch dangling on one wrist, an air of importance trailing behind her like perfume, was Morgan Hale. Of course I didn't know her as Morgan Hale. She introduced herself as simply Mo. She didn't shake hands, didn't smile. "You're the Mandarin tutor," she declared. "I need to be fluent enough to lead business meetings in 6 months. I assume that won't be a problem." She didn't wait for an answer before gesturing toward a custom-built study with a massive mahogany desk and a crystal globe in the corner. That first lesson was a disaster. Mo mispronounced nearly everything. She couldn't differentiate tones. She mixed up hello with you die and got defensive every time I corrected her. But she was determined. I'll give her that. By the end of the second session, she was scribbling down phonetic sounds and barking at me like a drill sergeant. "You'll need to bring coffee next time," she said, casually waving a hand. "Use the service entrance. I don't like the neighbors seeing staff." Staff? Right. That's what I was to her. A well-dressed, overqualified servant. But I bit my tongue. $700 a week was hard to argue with, especially when I still owed $14,000 on my federal loans and my rent had just gone up again. Over the next several weeks, we found a strange rhythm. I taught her basic grammar and cultural nuances. She barked orders and tried to act like she understood more than she did. Every single sentence had to be broken down phonetically for her to memorize. Fluency, not even close. But it was clear she wasn't doing this for the language. She was chasing something. Validation. Respect. "I'm not just a pretty face," she muttered during one lesson. "Everyone thinks I am. A trophy. But I'm about to lead a $60 million merger with Chinese investors. I'll show them." That was the first time I saw something human beneath the designer facade. She wasn't just rich and entitled. She was insecure, desperate to prove herself. And maybe I understood that. Because I too was constantly fighting to be taken seriously. So I did what I always do. I got to work. I redesigned her lessons into full scripts, business proposals, negotiations, polite banter, all written phonetically. I coached her on cultural etiquette, taught her when to bow, how to toast, what topics to avoid. She wasn't learning Mandarin. She was learning how to perform Mandarin, and she was getting pretty good at it, at least on paper. But one thing she never learned, who I really was, and I never told her. Because as far as Mo was concerned, I was just the help. By month 3, we were meeting twice a week like clockwork. Tuesday evenings, Saturday mornings. Always in that same penthouse, always with a wall of glass between us and the skyline. Mo Morgan, though I still didn't know her last name, had settled into the fantasy she was crafting. And I was her stage director. She'd enter the room like a Broadway lead, tossing her coat, grabbing a bottle of imported water, and launching into her Mandarin script like she was delivering a monologue. It was all performance. And yet, I kept showing up. Because the pay was great. Because I was saving faster than ever. And if I'm honest, because a part of me was fascinated. See, Morgan wasn't stupid. She was just desperate. She could memorize quickly, she had poise, and she knew how to mimic authority. But she didn't understand a single thing she was saying. If someone interrupted her mid-pitch with a question in Mandarin, she'd be lost. If a meeting went even slightly off script, she'd collapse. And she knew it. So she clung to me. One night, after a particularly long session, she poured herself a glass of wine and leaned back, her mask slipping just slightly. "You know what they all think?" she asked. I glanced up from the pronunciation sheet. "Who's they?" She waved vaguely. "Board members, executives, wives at the country club, everyone. They think I married into this. That I didn't earn anything. But when I close this deal, they'll all see." I paused. "What deal?" Her eyes lit up. "The Xiangwei Logistics merger. It's massive $60 million in cross-market value. My husband's firm is facilitating it, but I'm handling the Mandarin side. I've told them I've studied for years. They think I'm fluent." I stared at her. "Wait. You told them you're fluent?" She smiled proudly. "Of course. They wouldn't take me seriously otherwise." I swallowed the knot rising in my throat. "Mo, this is risky. Mandarin takes years. You've made great progress, but memorizing lines isn't the same as fluency. You could—" "I don't have years," she snapped. "I have 3 weeks. The pitch is set, and I will deliver it flawlessly." Her voice cracked on flawlessly. And in that moment I saw it, the fear behind the glamour, the cracks beneath the confidence. So I did what I always do when people are falling apart. I caught her. "I'll help," I said softly. "We'll run extra sessions. I'll rewrite the entire presentation into phonetics. We'll rehearse every variation, every greeting, every possible answer." She looked at me, eyes wide. "You'd do that?" "Of course," I said. "I've got you." And for a moment something unspoken passed between us. Maybe not respect, but gratitude at least. From that point on, I became more than her tutor. I was her voice coach, her cultural consultant, her silent shield. I even taught her how to fake laughter at the right parts of a meeting, how to mirror gestures in formal settings, how to accept a gift with both hands. Every sentence she learned was written in English letters. Every emotion she projected was rehearsed. We were building a house of cards, and I was the architect. 2 weeks before the presentation, she could recite the entire 20-minute pitch without stammering. She couldn't explain what any of it meant, but she didn't care. "I sound convincing," she said. "That's all that matters." I wanted to tell her the truth, that convincing isn't the same as competent, that one unexpected question could ruin everything. But I didn't. Because honestly, it wasn't my deal. I was just the ghost behind the curtain, or so I thought, until one offhand comment changed everything. It was after a Saturday morning session. She was finishing her latte while I packed my things. "There's a gala next weekend," she said. "Children's Heart Foundation. All the top donors will be there. I'll be dropping a few Mandarin phrases into conversation just to impress." I froze. My company, Westmere Holdings, was one of the lead sponsors for that same gala. I'd be attending, seated at our corporate table, with my real name, my real face. And suddenly I realized something chilling. Morgan Hale, the woman I'd been tutoring for months, wasn't just a rich socialite. She was the wife of my CEO. The moment that realization hit me, everything inside me twisted. Morgan Hale wasn't just Morgan Hale. She was Morgan Hale Winters, wife of Caleb Winters, my boss, the CEO of Westmere Holdings. The man who personally interviewed me 3 years ago shook my hand with that quiet, analytical smile and told me I had vision. And now his wife had been paying me in cash twice a week for Mandarin lessons, under a fake name, while I was working under my real one just a few floors below his office. The irony blinding. I stood frozen in her foyer that Saturday, the sunlight bouncing off crystal fixtures and irony dripping from every corner of the room. Morgan had no clue. She had no idea the woman coaching her through Mandarin negotiations was the same woman who sat on the international development team at her husband's company. And I wasn't about to tell her. I left her penthouse that day with my tote bag full of flashcards and a stomach full of dread. Because next Saturday night we were going to be in the same ballroom under the same chandeliers. Only this time I wouldn't be the one hiding behind glasses and cardigans. I'd be Tessa Hartley, corporate power blazer, contact lenses updo and all. I debated skipping the gala altogether, but it wasn't optional. I was a key figure in our Asian division. We were one of the lead sponsors. I had to show face. Still, I made a plan. I'd stay at our company table, keep my head down, avoid unnecessary mingling. The gala was massive after all. What were the chances we'd even cross paths? Turns out the chances were 100%. The event was dazzling. Held at the Lakeshore Grand Ballroom with cascading floral installations and string quartets playing Coldplay covers. Our corporate table was near the front. I sat beside two senior VPs surrounded by linen napkins folded into origami and plates I could barely pronounce. Midway through the entree, I saw her, Morgan, draped in a silver satin gown that shimmered like mercury under the chandeliers, laughing with that throaty, attention-commanding voice, floating from table to table like she owned the entire night. And then I saw him, Caleb Winters, beside her, smiling, one hand on her lower back, the other nursing a neat glass of bourbon. The room blurred for a moment. I wasn't sure if it was the champagne or the weight of the secret hanging between us, but I suddenly felt like I was on a tightrope. One gust of wind from the wrong direction and it would all come crashing down. I looked away, focused on my plate, tried to lose myself in polite corporate chatter. When dessert was served, I excused myself to the restroom, hoping for a few moments to collect myself and avoid any accidental encounter. But fate had other plans. As I exited the restroom and turned the corner, Morgan was heading directly toward me. I panicked. She wasn't looking at me yet. She was focused on someone at the next table. I had a few seconds, just enough time to slide back into my seat and bury my face in my champagne glass. But then, Tessa, my colleague 3 seats down, called my name loudly, cheerfully, just as Morgan passed behind me. I looked up reflexively, and our eyes met. 2 seconds. That's all it took. Her expression faltered. Eyes narrowed just a bit. A flicker of confusion. Not full recognition, but something. Like the tip of a memory trying to claw its way out. And then she kept walking. That night, I barely slept. My brain kept replaying that moment on a loop. Did she recognize me? Did she figure it out? Did I just blow my cover? I told myself I was overthinking it. That I was just one of dozens of women she saw that night. That 2 seconds of eye contact didn't mean anything. But I was wrong. So very wrong. Because the next morning at exactly 7:04 a.m., Morgan Hale Winters stormed into my office. And she wasn't confused anymore. She didn't knock. The door flew open with enough force to rattle my bookshelf, and there she was, Morgan Hale Winters, no longer hiding behind a socialite smile or a carefully constructed persona. Her face was pure fury. Gone was the poised woman in the silver gown. In her place stood a storm hair, perfectly set, emerald heels stabbing the carpet, eyes sharpened like glass daggers. "You knew," she hissed. I closed my laptop slowly, heart pounding but face calm. "Good morning, Morgan." Her nostrils flared. "You knew who I was. This entire time you knew I was married to Caleb. You knew I was the one leading the Shangwei pitch. And you still sat there like I was nothing. Like I didn't exist." I stayed silent for a second, choosing every word with care. "I knew you as Mo, a client who hired me under a pseudonym. And I respected that anonymity until now." "Don't twist this," she snapped. "You disrespected me in front of hundreds of people. You stayed seated when I walked past. Do you know how that looked?" "Yes," I said quietly. "It looked like someone eating dessert." "Because that's what I was doing." Her voice dropped to a venomous whisper. "You humiliated me." And suddenly I saw it. This wasn't about the gala. Not really. This was about control. Morgan had spent months creating an image, the elegant businesswoman fluent in Mandarin leading a multi-million-dollar deal. And I, her anonymous invisible tutor, had walked through the front door of her world, not as help, not as support, but as someone with power. That terrified her. "I will speak to Caleb," she said, straightening her shoulders. "You will be out of this company by noon." Then she turned and stormed out. I sat there, pulse roaring in my ears, but I wasn't afraid. I was done being afraid. An hour later, Caleb Winters called me into his office. He looked tired, paler than usual, like the weight of his marriage was pressing against his temples. He didn't even make me sit. Tessa, he began, this is difficult. I know how valuable you are. But Margot Morgan, she's insistent, and I can't. You're firing me, I asked flatly. I'll give you severance, he rushed. Glowing references. I'll personally recommend you anywhere. This has nothing to do with your performance. I stared at him, letting the silence stretch. Then I said, you're firing the woman who built your international strategy division because your wife misinterpreted a seating arrangement. He winced. You don't understand. At home, this is delicate. She feels threatened, I finished. Because she lied to everyone about her Mandarin skills and realized I could expose her. He froze. I watched him closely, his jaw flexed. You knew I asked. You knew she wasn't really fluent, didn't you? He said nothing. I'm sorry, Tessa, he repeated. And that's when I stood up, walked to his computer, and calmly opened my inbox. I recorded every single tutoring session for reference and lesson planning, I said, and for my protection. You should check your email. He turned pale. One click, then another. The screen filled with video thumbnails. In each one, his wife struggling through basic phrases, pleading for phonetic translations, stumbling over the word for contract. You've been lying to your investors, I said softly. For 8 months, I've been covering for your wife. She can't speak Mandarin. She's memorized a script. And if anyone goes off script during that presentation, everything falls apart. He looked up slowly. Why didn't you say something sooner? I adjusted my posture, looking him directly in the eye. Because I'm a professional. Your wife hired me through a third-party service under a different name. I honored her request for privacy. But since she's now actively destroying my career over a false accusation, those boundaries are gone. He exhaled heavily, pressing his palms together in front of his mouth. This presentation is in 3 days, he muttered. If this deal collapses, it will, I said. Unless someone speaks fluent Mandarin. Unless someone can answer real-time questions about regulatory timelines, import laws, cultural customs. His eyes met mine again. And for the first time in the entire conversation, he looked afraid. I picked up my bag. Good luck, I said. And then I left. But that wouldn't be the last time we spoke. Not even close. The next 48 hours were quiet. Too quiet. No emails, no calls, no retaliation lawsuits. Just a gaping silence where my career used to be. I spent the time updating my resume, drafting cover letters, and trying not to think about the avalanche I'd just triggered. But let's be honest, my phone never left my side. Every buzz sent my heart sprinting. Would it be Caleb, the HR team, Morgan's attorney? Instead, it was Morgan herself. On the 3rd evening after our confrontation, I got a voicemail. She didn't even try to hide her fury. You signed a confidentiality agreement, she snapped. You had no right to share those videos. I will sue you, I will bury you, and I will make sure no one in this city hires you again. Click. I listened twice. Then I called her back. She picked up on the 2nd ring. Morgan, I said calmly, you should really read those agreements more carefully. They protect your privacy from external exposure, sure, but they don't give you the right to ruin someone's career based on a false accusation. Her voice came out flat. You're still fired. I figured, I replied. But your presentation's tomorrow. Good luck with that. There was a long silence. Then a beep. Call ended. I tried to push it all out of my mind. I told myself it was over, that I'd done the right thing. But the truth, I couldn't stop thinking about the investors. I knew who they were. I'd worked with them. Not directly, but close enough. Mr. Chen from Shanghai had flown in from Beijing, always polite, always curious about your family before business. Miss Liu, the regulatory analyst, was meticulous, sharp, and known to reject entire deals over cultural missteps. These weren't people you could dazzle with rehearsed phrases. They were seasoned professionals. They'd smell Morgan's fraud from across the room. And if they walked, so would the $60 million. And when the deal went down, so would a dozen jobs, including the very team I helped build. That reality made it hard to sleep. It was 10:04 the next morning when my phone rang again. Caleb. Tessa, he said, rushed, panicked. I need your help. I didn't respond. The investors showed up early. They're doing lunch before the presentation. Morgan tried to chat with them casually. And now she's locked herself in the bathroom. I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I let the silence linger. I'm sorry, he said quickly. Look, I know I messed up. I shouldn't have fired you. But please don't let innocent people suffer because of this. If this deal collapses, I'll have to lay off half the international team. That hit me hard, because that team wasn't just my colleagues. They were my people. I'd recruited them, trained them, grew that branch from nothing with them. They were late-night coffee warriors and last-minute fixers. They didn't deserve this, so I took a breath. I'll make you a deal. I'm listening. I'll come in. One time, as a consultant. I'll help with translation and investor Q&A, but I'm not doing it to save Morgan's ego. Understood. I'm doing it for the team. No interference. No comments. And after today, I never want to hear your wife's name again. He paused. Deal. I hung up, threw on a blazer, and hailed a cab. My stomach flipped the entire ride over. I didn't know what I was walking into, but I knew one thing for certain. If Morgan tried to fake her way through this presentation, it would crash and burn. And if I didn't help, she'd take half the company down with her. But helping didn't mean forgiving. It meant making sure the truth was louder than the performance. And I intended to be the loudest voice in that room. I arrived at Westmere headquarters 45 minutes before the presentation. The building looked the same. The receptionist smiled like she always had. But everything felt different. Like I was walking back into a place I no longer belonged but somehow still had unfinished business with. The executive conference room had been transformed. Banners with the Xiangwei logo flanked a massive screen displaying animated slides. Crystal pitchers of cucumber water stood beside porcelain tea sets. The catering screamed respectful opulence. Caleb had clearly spared no expense to impress the investors. And there, near the windows, was Morgan. She looked incredible. Tailored navy suit, impeccably styled hair, calm on the outside. But her eyes gave her away. She was pacing lips, moving without sound, likely rehearsing her phonetic script for the 1,000th time. When she saw me walk in, her entire face twisted. What is she doing here? She spat, spinning toward Caleb like I wasn't even in the room. She's here to help, he replied calmly. Unless you'd prefer to handle the Q&A yourself? Morgan's face went pale. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. We both knew she couldn't survive a single question that wasn't pre-scripted. Her Mandarin was memorized gibberish. A verbal mask, and it was starting to slip. Fine, she muttered, turning away. But she stays in the background. This is my presentation, my deal, my win. Understood, I said with a pleasant smile. I'll only speak when spoken to. I meant it. Mostly. At exactly noon, the Xiangwei delegation arrived. Mr. Chen, always courteous, bowed and greeted us in Mandarin. I responded with the proper greeting, a slight nod and a subtle phrase referencing Spring Festival. His smile widened with recognition. Ah, someone who truly understands, he said warmly. Miss Liu shook my hand firmly and asked in perfect English, "What's your experience with logistics compliance in Shanghai?" We've implemented 4 regional partnerships there, I replied smoothly. Most recently with Jinlin Express. I'd be happy to elaborate after the pitch. She nodded. Professional? Pleasant? Impressed. Morgan stood a few feet away watching me with growing panic. Because they liked me. And she knew it. We all sat. The lights dimmed slightly. The first slide appeared. Morgan took center stage. And to her credit, she delivered her monologue well. Every line, every syllable was hit exactly as we rehearsed. Her pronunciation was clean enough, her pacing steady, her tone confident. She was a high-functioning parrot, and the cage was about to swing open. Then came the question. Miss Liu, after scribbling a few notes, raised her hand. In Mandarin, she asked, "Could you clarify the distribution timeline for the warehouse transition in Pudong?" Morgan froze. Her lips parted, but nothing came out. "I'm sorry," she said in English. Miss Liu repeated the question slowly, gently. Morgan looked at me, pleading. I didn't move. She turned back to the investors, her mouth twitching, and tried, the pudong. Time is, it was a train wreck. A slow-motion implosion in real time. Mr. Chen's expression shifted. His fingers folded. He leaned back. The energy in the room changed. They knew. Morgan's illusion shattered. She fumbled, stuttered, tried to pivot in English, but even that fell flat. Finally, she stammered, "Perhaps my consultant could answer that." All eyes turned to me. I stood slowly, smoothly, confident. In Mandarin, I explained the rollout plan, referenced compliance hurdles, and even addressed a recent change in port inspection timing. Mr. Chen nodded thoughtfully. Miss Liu scribbled notes. Every question from that point came to me. Morgan. She might as well have been invisible. By the time I finished addressing a final question about joint venture taxation, the deal was already leaning in our favor, but completely out of her hands. Morgan just stood there, her polished armor crumbling, eyes glossed with humiliation. This was supposed to be her moment, but she hadn't earned it. And everyone in that room could see it now. The silence that followed my final answer was thick. Not awkward, just decisive. Mr. Chen folded his notes and leaned forward with a practiced smile. But behind his calm demeanor, I could feel the shift. The illusion was gone. The performance was over. And Morgan, bless her, was still standing at the head of the room, clutching the edge of the podium like it might save her from drowning. Then came the question that sealed it. Mr. Chen looked directly at Caleb. "I'm a bit confused about the structure of this partnership," he said gently. "We were told Mrs. Winters would be our primary liaison, but it seems clear Miss..." He turned to me. "Miss Hartley is far more qualified. Could you clarify who we'd be dealing with moving forward?" I didn't speak. That wasn't my place. I turned toward Caleb, curious to see what he'd say, what he'd do, whether he'd back his wife or face the reality in front of him. He hesitated just for a beat too long. Morgan, still frozen, didn't move a muscle. And finally I said, "There may have been some miscommunication about internal roles. Perhaps it would be best to reconvene after that structure is clarified." Mr. Chen nodded once. "I think that would be wise." The investors stood. Handshakes were exchanged, polite smiles offered. But the room had already been emptied of whatever optimism had walked in earlier. Miss Liu paused on her way out and looked at me with a quiet intensity. "We were very impressed with your professionalism and your insight," she said. "Should you be the one representing this company in the future, we would be very open to continuing discussions." I thanked her, bowed lightly, and watched as they exited one by one. And then, silence. Morgan slowly sank into one of the leather chairs at the far end of the room. Her eyes locked on her lap, shoulders rigid with shame. Caleb stood near the windows, arms crossed, jaw clenched. I stayed behind to gather the translated documents and presentation notes I'd prepared weeks ago. Every piece of prep work she'd rehearsed. Every word she'd memorized. Every fake skill she tried to pass off as authentic. $60 million, Caleb finally muttered. Gone. I glanced over. It was never really there. You don't build partnerships with lies. Not with investors like that. Morgan looked up for the first time. Her mascara had smudged. Her voice was brittle. "This is your fault." I stopped mid-fold. "No," I said calmly. "This is the consequence of your choices." She stood up. "I worked so hard. You memorized words you didn't understand." I cut in firm, but not cruel. "That's not fluency. That's theater. And respect isn't something you can manufacture. It's earned." She opened her mouth to speak but closed it again. There was nothing left to say. I walked to the door, paused, and looked back at her one last time. "For what it's worth," I said, "I actually pitied you. Back when you were just Mo. I saw how badly you wanted to be respected. I wanted that for you too. But you thought power meant pretending. It doesn't." She didn't respond. Caleb looked between us, silent, like a man watching the final scene of a tragedy he co-wrote but couldn't rewrite. I left the room without another word. As I stepped into the elevator, I felt a strange calm wash over me. Not triumph, not revenge, just closure. But the story wasn't quite over. Because 2 weeks later, Caleb called again. Not out of desperation, but with an offer. The call came on a quiet Monday morning 2 weeks after the implosion. I'd been spending my days job hunting, taking long walks by the lake, and trying to make peace with everything that had happened. The chaos had settled, but the aftershocks still rippled under the surface. So when I saw Caleb Winter's name flash across my phone screen, I almost didn't answer. But curiosity got the better of me. "Hi," I said cautiously. "Tessa," he replied, his voice measured. "I know you're probably not thrilled to hear from me." "That depends," I said. "Are you calling to offer another severance package, or did Morgan leave another angry voicemail?" He actually laughed a soft, tired chuckle. "Neither. Actually, I wanted to talk to you about something serious." There was a pause. "The board wants to meet with you." I sat up straighter. "The board," I repeated. "Why?" He exhaled slowly. "After the investors walked, they did some digging. And when they saw the footage of the presentation, they saw exactly what happened and who saved the day. Some of them already knew your name. Apparently, you made quite an impression over the last 3 years." I said nothing, waiting. "They're not pleased with how your termination was handled," Caleb admitted. "In fact, they were furious." He cleared his throat. "They'd like to offer you a new position, Vice President of International Business Development. Full authority to rebuild the division your way. Higher salary, your own team, a direct reporting line to the board." I blinked. "I thought I was blacklisted," I said quietly. "You were betrayed," he said. "By me, and by her. But not everyone at Westmere agreed with how things were handled, least of all the people you used to lead." I leaned back on my couch, letting the weight of that sink in. "You're saying you want me to come back? And run the department Morgan tried to destroy?" He didn't answer, but he didn't have to. "What about her?" I asked. "She's no longer involved in operations, officially. The board made it clear." I hesitated. Then I laid out my terms. 3 conditions, I said. 1, written policy, no executive family members involved in hiring, firing, or departmental decisions. Done. 2, I get to restructure the international division from the ground up. I don't answer to anyone but the board. Agreed. 3, I want a formal apology in my personnel file for the wrongful termination. He didn't even flinch. Consider it handled. We met later that week to sign papers. The contract was solid. The terms ironclad. My new office would be 2 floors above his. And when I walked back into that building, it wasn't as the girl clutching a file folder hoping to keep her job. It was as a decision maker. The kind who no longer needed to hide behind pseudonyms. The kind who didn't ask for permission to take up space. Morgan never spoke to me again. Not in person. Not in passing. Not even through Caleb. But word spread quickly about how she'd been caught faking language fluency. About how the biggest investors Westmere had lined up in years walked out mid-presentation. About how I'd returned and signed a partnership worth $68 million, $8 million more than the original deal. Apparently, Morgan had started taking Spanish lessons after that. From a different tutor, of course. I only hoped the new girl was getting paid in advance. Because I knew how these stories went. People like Morgan weren't interested in learning, only performing. And sooner or later, that curtain always falls. 6 months passed. 6 intense, exhilarating, challenging months. By then, I'd not only rebuilt the international division, I'd expanded it. New hires, new systems, and most importantly, new trust. The clients who once wavered returned. Others came knocking without us even having to reach out. And the board, they were more than pleased. We finalized the Shanghai deal at a revised scope, $68 million with deeper integration and long-term cooperation across 3 Asian markets. It was more than just a contract. It was redemption. I'd proven that authenticity beats theatrics. That diligence trumps ego. That performance might win attention, but substance earns respect. And then, just when I thought the storm had passed, Caleb knocked on my new office door. He looked awkward. Not nervous exactly, but like a man rehearsing a line he didn't want to say. "We're making some structural changes at the top," he said, clearing his throat. "The board's been very happy with your results. They're considering a new role, Senior Vice President of Global Operations." I raised an eyebrow. That's a big job. It would mean overseeing everything international, acquisitions, strategy, cultural alignment. "You'd report directly to the board," and he paused. "You'd technically be my superior when it comes to all non-domestic business." I stared at him for a long beat. "Let me guess," I said. "This wasn't your idea." He smiled tightly. "No, but I agree with it." I leaned back in my chair. "You know this is ironic, right?" Painfully, he replied. "Because once I was just the girl who didn't stand up fast enough. And now I was being asked to run half the company. I took the job. Not for revenge, not even for pride, but because I'd earned it, and I wanted to build something real. Under my leadership, Westmere opened offices in Seoul and Toronto, restructured our import strategy in Brazil, and locked down exclusive deals with shipping conglomerates that once ignored our emails. I was on the cover of Business Sphere 3 months later. The headline read, "The executive they tried to fire now saving their future." I clipped the article and framed it in my office. It hangs next to the first Mandarin workbook I used during Mo's lessons. The pages are still wrinkled from coffee spills and angry scribbles. Morgan became a ghost around the company after her collapse. Her social circle turned cold. People whispered about what happened behind their hands. She tried blaming me, but there were too many witnesses, too many receipts. Eventually, she stopped showing up altogether. And I kept showing up. Every day. With clarity. With purpose. And with a quiet kind of confidence that doesn't need to be shouted from a stage or hidden behind memorized phrases. Because here's the thing. I never wanted to be the hero. I just wanted to be respected. And it turned out those two things weren't so different after all. A few weeks after my promotion was officially announced, I received an invitation in the mail. A thick, ivory-colored envelope with calligraphy that looked like it had been lifted straight from a wedding planner's Pinterest board. No return address, just gold foil lettering on the flap, the Ellington Foundation Annual Gala. I almost laughed. It was one of the most exclusive charity galas in Chicago. Old money, old grudges, and newer scandals dressed in couture. I hadn't attended last year. You know, the year I was fired the morning after. But this time my name wasn't just on the guest list. I was the keynote speaker. Apparently, the foundation wanted someone to talk about integrity and international leadership. I guess karma really does have a sense of humor. I wore a black velvet gown with clean lines and no drama. My hair was down simple waves. No glass slipper fairy tale. Just me. Grown. Grounded. When I walked into the venue, I felt every eye flick toward me. Some smiled. Some whispered. One or two probably tried to remember which headline I was attached to. I found my seat easily, front row center table, right next to a few regional CEOs and the mayor's chief of staff. And then I saw her. Across the room, in the shadows near the bar, Morgan. Not dressed in silver this time. No spotlight. No stage. Just a quiet seat near the edge, like someone who had once danced in the center of the room, but now wasn't sure she was even invited. Our eyes met briefly. She didn't scowl. Didn't look away. She simply looked. Not angry, not pitiful. Just empty. Like she'd burned through all her rage and all she had left was the memory of what she could have been. I held her gaze for 2 seconds, then turned away. Because this night wasn't about her. It was about telling my story on my own terms. When it was my turn to speak, I walked to the podium without notes. I didn't need them. I wasn't delivering a pitch. I was telling the truth. I used to think that respect was about titles. I began. Or how many people stand when you enter a room. Laughter rippled gently through the crowd. But over time, I learned something better. Respect isn't about what others give you. It's about what you give to others, even when they don't return it. Especially then. I looked around the room. At one point, I was told my career was over because someone felt disrespected. But in truth, it was their illusion of authority that cracked, not my integrity. There was a stillness after I finished. Then applause. Long. Real. As I stepped down from the stage, a dozen people came up to shake my hand. Investors, founders, young professionals. Most said the same thing in different words. Thank you for saying what so many of us feel but don't get to say out loud. I slipped out early. The night had said what it needed to. Outside, the air was cool and quiet. My driver was just pulling up when I heard someone behind me. Tessa. I turned. It was Morgan. She looked tired. Not defeated, just different, softer. Your speech, she said. It was good. I nodded. Thank you. She paused. I've started taking Spanish lessons, she said, almost sheepish. I smiled a little. Hopefully with someone you're honest with this time. A flicker of something crossed her face. Regret? Acceptance? Maybe both. I didn't realize she said how hard it is to rebuild something when you've burned everything behind you. I didn't respond. Because honestly, I didn't know what to say to that. After a moment, she nodded, once turned and walked away. No drama. No grand apology. Just silence. And that, in a strange way, was enough. Fall arrived in Chicago like it always does, suddenly and with no patience. The trees outside my new office flamed gold and rust. The lake turned slate gray, and the chill in the air had that particular Midwest bite that made even coffee feel comforting again. I had settled into my new role with surprising ease. Running global operations wasn't just a title, it was a rhythm. Meetings with foreign partners at 6 a.m. strategy reviews until 9 p.m., and the kind of high-stakes decision-making that once would have sent me into panic spirals now felt like second nature. But not everything had stabilized. There were whispers. You can't shake an implosion like Morgan's without a long echo behind it. Some staff still tiptoed around the subject. Others avoided saying her name altogether. It was like she had become a myth, the woman who faked her fluency and nearly sunk a $60 million deal. And then one afternoon, an internal memo leaked. It wasn't malicious, just sloppy. A junior assistant accidentally attached the wrong PDF to an interdepartmental update. Instead of a weekly meeting agenda, it was a summary of board meeting minutes 1 that referenced a proposed restructure of the executive team. The final bullet: potential replacement of CEO Caleb Winters pending further review. Candidate recommendation: Tessa Hartley. I stared at the screen for a full minute, unsure whether to laugh, cry, or immediately quit. Caleb hadn't said a word about it. Not a single syllable. And I wasn't naive enough to think he didn't know. That night I worked late. Not because I had to, but because I needed to sit in the quiet and think about what this all meant. Power, when it comes suddenly, is a strange thing. People project onto you. They assume you wanted it. Fought for it. Even if it dropped in your lap while you were just trying to survive. Would I take the CEO role? Could I? I didn't know. But what I did know, what I had learned the hard way, was this. Success without purpose is hollow. It's not about the title on your door or the corner view. It's about waking up knowing you didn't fake your way into the room. You earned your seat. With sweat, with honesty, with consistency. I shut down my computer and grabbed my coat. The elevator ride down was silent, save for the quiet hum of a late-night janitor humming a Motown tune from decades past. Outside, the streetlights blinked to life. I stood on the sidewalk and watched the city move around me, cars weaving, people rushing, stories unfolding in windows above me. And I made a choice. I wouldn't chase the CEO title. Not unless I believed I could serve people better by sitting in that seat than I could by staying exactly where I was. That memo, it wasn't a crown. It was a test. And for the first time in a long time, I felt no need to prove anything to anyone. Not even myself. The board called me in the following week. Not for a formal offer, not yet. But the energy in the room made it clear the question of succession was no longer theoretical. Tessa, one of the senior directors, began. We've been reviewing Westmere's trajectory under your leadership these past 6 months. Frankly, the turnaround has exceeded our expectations. I nodded, remaining quiet, measured. Let them speak. The Xiangwei contract wasn't just saved, another added, it was multiplied. The Singapore deal. That was a coup. And your restructuring of our vendor operations in Eastern Europe. Brilliant. I could feel the shift as they circled the topic. They weren't just congratulating me. They were warming me up. Then came the line I'd been waiting for. We want to begin conversations about global leadership, specifically how your vision might guide this company long-term. Translation. They were seriously considering me for CEO, but I'd already made up my mind. I appreciate the confidence, I said. Truly. But I have a condition before I even entertain that role. They leaned in. I'm not interested in stepping into a position based on chaos. If the board's plan is to replace Caleb just to make headlines or fix PR optics, I'm out. That's not leadership, that's theater. There was a pause. Then the CFO, a woman named Diane I deeply respected, spoke up. This isn't about headlines, Tessa. It's about building something sustainable. We've watched you take a broken department and turn it into a global asset in under a year. That's not PR, that's vision. I let the silence settle. Then I said what had been on my mind since the moment I read that memo. I don't want to be a CEO who takes over because someone failed, I said. If I take that seat, it has to be because I'm the best person for it, not because someone else fell. And the truth, Caleb hadn't failed. Not in the core of his job. He'd trusted the wrong person, yes. He'd chosen loyalty over logic, but he had also given me the freedom to rebuild something real. And that counted for something. If you do choose to make a change, I said, I'll be ready, but I won't pull the trigger. The board didn't argue. They respected it. They knew I wasn't here to play politics. I was here to lead. As I left that meeting, I realized something I hadn't expected. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't even excited. I was grounded. This company, this second chance, it wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about responsibility. Because no matter what my title said on paper, I was already leading. Every deal I negotiated, every team I supported, every young analyst who walked through my door with a shaky pitch deck and big dreams, I was already shaping the future of Westmere. And that was a kind of power no title could grant or take away. As I stepped into the elevator, I caught my reflection in the polished steel doors. No blazer, no mask, just me. The same girl who once got fired for not standing fast enough, now standing for something much bigger. 2 months later, I received an unexpected visitor. It was just after 7 p.m., and the office was mostly empty. The kind of quiet that feels thick like the building itself is winding down. I was finishing up notes for a potential acquisition meeting when my assistant knocked gently. Tessa, there's someone asking to speak with you. Says it's personal. I blinked. Who? She hesitated. Morgan Winters. I sat back in my chair. The name felt like it belonged to another life. Another version of me. The one who quietly entered a penthouse twice a week with lesson plans and no idea what storm she was walking into. Send her in. When Morgan stepped inside, I barely recognized her. Gone were the designer heels and power suits. She wore flats. Minimal makeup. Her hair was tied back in a loose knot that looked more functional than fashionable. But more than that, it was her expression. No entitlement, no performance. Just rawness. She didn't speak right away. Just looked around the office. My office, like she needed a moment to accept it was real. I wanted to see it for myself, she finally said softly. Where you ended up. I stood motioned toward the visitor chair. What can I do for you, Morgan? She sat slowly, clasping her hands in her lap. I'm not here to ask for anything, she said. I wanted to acknowledge everything. I raised an eyebrow. Everything. I know I blamed you. I know I tried to twist the story. I told myself you set me up. That you were just waiting to embarrass me. But the truth is, I was afraid. And you were the only one who saw it. She looked up at me, eyes clear. And instead of humiliating me, you helped me. I didn't say anything, because it wasn't my job to fix this part. It never was. She took a breath. I've started working with a nonprofit, translating materials for immigrant families. I'm learning Mandarin again this time, for real. I nodded. That's good. She smiled, but it was fragile. There's something freeing about being bad at something and not pretending otherwise. I leaned back in my chair, studying her. I never hated you, I said. But I couldn't let you ruin what I'd built. Not when I worked so hard to get here. I know, she whispered. And you were right to stop me. We sat in silence for a beat. Two women who had once stood on opposite sides of a very public, very painful line, now sitting in the same room quietly acknowledging the wreckage and what rose from it. Then she stood. I won't bother you again, she said. I just needed to say it. Out loud. Thank you, I replied. She nodded and turned toward the door. As she reached for the handle, she paused. Do you believe people can change? I thought about that. Not just about her, but about myself. About Caleb. About all the people who had stayed quiet when I was pushed out. About those who stepped forward later to help rebuild. I believe people can choose to, I said. She gave a small, grateful smile. Then she left. And for the first time since this whole thing began, I felt closure. Not the kind that's clean or easy, but the kind that comes when you finally stop looking for an apology and realize you don't need one to move on. Because the best revenge is being untouchable by the things that used to break you. A year later, I found myself standing on the rooftop of the Westmere headquarters, watching the city glow beneath a sky brushed in deep orange and fading gold. The building was quiet, it was after hours, and most of the team had already left after our quarterly celebration. But I liked to linger. The skyline felt different now, not because it had changed, because I had. So much had happened in 12 months. Deals closed, teams expanded, partnerships formed. But more than the numbers, it was the foundation of it all that I felt proudest of, because this time we were building it with integrity. And it hadn't gone unnoticed. Earlier that week, the board formally announced that I would be promoted again, this time as President of Global Strategy and Operations. It wasn't just a new title. It was the clearest signal yet that they weren't just rewarding loyalty or performance. They were investing in leadership rooted in authenticity. I thought back to the night it all began. The gala. The so-called disrespect. That 2-second glance that cost me my job and almost derailed my entire future. But what it gave me instead? Clarity, power, purpose. I used to think success was about climbing higher, earning more, commanding the room. And sure, those things can matter. But the true marker of success, it's how you carry yourself when no one is watching. It's whether you still choose truth over convenience, humility over performance, and service over ego. Morgan's fall taught me that, and so did my own. Because before all this, before the boardroom victories and executive titles, I was just someone trying to be respected. Not praised, not worshipped, just respected. And the irony, I earned that respect the moment I stopped chasing it. I pulled my coat tighter around my shoulders and took one last look at the city before heading back downstairs. My phone buzzed with a message from one of our new Shanghai partners confirming a multi-year strategic alliance. I smiled. Another door opened. Another story starting. But this time I'd walk through it without disguises, without fear, and without anyone telling me where I did or didn't belong. Because now I knew. I belonged exactly where I stood. Looking back now, it's easy to mark the milestones, the firings, the promotions, the boardroom battles. But the real transformation didn't happen in those big dramatic moments. It happened in the quiet ones. Like sitting alone in my apartment the night after I got fired, unsure if I'd pay rent the next month. Or that early morning sipping burnt coffee while rewriting Morgan's phonetic pitch line by line, wondering why I still cared enough to get it right. Or standing silently in the elevator watching my reflection shift from invisible employee to executive with purpose. Those are the moments that shape you, not because they're flashy, but because they demand a choice. Do you shrink? Do you settle? Or do you rise? And rising doesn't always mean fighting louder. Sometimes it means walking away, saying no, or quietly choosing to build a version of yourself no one else sees coming. To anyone listening right now, still waiting for your moment, don't wait for permission to become who you already are. Respect doesn't come from titles. Power doesn't come from fear. And success, real success, isn't about proving someone wrong. It's about proving to yourself that your integrity is non-negotiable. That no one, not a boss, not a board, not a bitter voice in a ballroom can take away what you've earned by being honest, patient, and prepared. Sometimes the most satisfying revenge isn't revenge at all. It's becoming someone they never saw coming, and knowing you got there without ever becoming like them. So keep going, quietly, fiercely, unapologetically. Your story isn't over yet. Not even close.